Residents for Resilience is a grassroots not-for-profit organization based right here in South Florida. And we're all about water. We're about safe, clean drinking water, flood mitigation, storm resiliency, and restoring the health and vitality of our priceless waterways. Our slogan, as some of you know, is it's hard to care about what you don't know about. So that's why we work so hard to fill in that information gap between government leaders, experts, scientists, and all of you fostering education, communication, advocation, and we really try to do it all through collaboration because we believe the more our residents learn, the more they realize these water issues aren't just something you read about, they're personal, especially with hurricane season just days away. Communities across South Florida are facing rising threats from extreme weather events, which include severe flooding like you see here and some of you experience firsthand. And these aren't just once in a year event, as we all know. These storm bombs are happening more frequently, unfortunately, and with more intensity. And not to mention skyrocketing insurance costs that goes with this. So the time to plan and prepare is now, not after this. And we're excited to bring you this lineup that's going to tell you more about climate news, climate planning, flood mitigation, and different resiliency options. And we hope you're going to walk away with real tools, data, and options to protect your homes, your neighborhoods, and your peace of mind. Our speakers tonight include Alex Harris. Alex, you want to wave your hand? And we have Adrian Santiago Tate and Brian Shaw. Alex is our head climate reporter of Miami Herald. Adrian is the founder of HighTide and Arkly Flood Maps, and Brian Shaw is the vice president of floodproofing.com. Let's all welcome them, give them a big old wave. They're going to be covering how to access accurate flood risk information, and they're going to be talking about ways to retrofit for resilience, and they're going to look at tools to navigate insurance challenges and how to get involved with community resilience solutions. Please mute your microphones, and we're going to start the show. Alex, we're going to begin with you.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for having me tonight. As Susie said, I'm the lead climate reporter of the Miami Herald. So if you've read anything recently about flood insurance or the rain bomb, or it's probably one of your talented local folks at the Sun Sentinel or here at the Herald. I'm also a lifelong Floridian, but I've only lived in South Florida since 2015. And I started covering climate change from our perspective down here in 2018. So I've gotten to know a lot about how our risk is shifting, and I wanted to share a little bit of that with you guys. I think let's just set the table here real fast and talk about what we're actually expecting. So obviously you all understand that climate change is a human-caused process that is affecting the world in a bazillion different ways. The most important one to us is sea level rise. And how much are we talking about? So right now we're running with we have a perspective where we are looking really at about 2 feet. Sorry, this is what I meant to start with. We're looking for this is what about 2 feet of sea level rise would look like for Fort Lauderdale, for example. As you can see, that red marks in there is places that would be permanently inundated. This is about what we're expecting by 2040, 2050, depending on exactly how much we continue to pollute in terms of fossil fuels. Now we can take it up to 3 feet. We can see that red does begin to grow quite a bit more. And that's sort of what we are looking at, maybe 2070, 2080. By the end of the century, we are looking at around 6 feet right now under most perspectives. This is the level that we are currently projecting under the field rise projections that local governments down here, including Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, Broward County, Miami-Dade, Miami Beach, all have agreed to build under. So we all have different sets of sea level rise projections. They range from pretty conservative to pretty audacious. And the general, what we're kind of looking at is around 2-ish feet. By 2040, 2050, around 3-ish feet, 10, 20 years after that, and all the way up to 6 feet by 2070. That's a lot of water. Well, what does that mean for you in the next 10, 20 years? So NOAA does a really handy thing every year where they measure high tide days. They only have one station that they really make this measurement with on the East Coast, and it's Virginia Key. So as you know, not really close to home for most of us who live here in Broward, but it's the best we've got, and they do think it averages out for most of the Southeast coast. And they say As of last year, we only had 6 days where the tide was so high that it caused flooding. Now you might stop and say, well, I'm pretty sure my street flooded more than 6 times last year, or hey, I'm pretty sure the king tides happened more than 6 times last year. This is just one station, which is a little data flaw here, but it's a good sort of metric for us to say, all right, flooding, that's our baseline, right? Well, if we're considering that last year was a baseline, we can probably conservatively see about twice as much flooding by 2040, so maybe 15 days a year. And if you go all the way up to 2050, maybe that's 35 days a year. And an important thing to remember about this high tide date is it's when the little dinghy at the end of the dock at the end of the University of Miami's campus in Virginia Key thinks it's high tide. It doesn't necessarily mean when the river backs up into your house or when it rains so much that that water inundates your home. There's a lot of different things that can cause flooding, but this is sort of the metric we're talking about, which, as you can see, is a steady increase up as we continue to not really mitigate for climate change effectively as a world and as a nation. What does that mean also for you guys locally is more flooding, shocker for everyone around here who's lived in South Florida. But you can actually really see that in the data. So I had a story out a couple of weeks ago where we mapped all FEMA flood claims in Florida since 2000. If you look earlier than 2000, most of those were from hurricanes. There really weren't any massive floods that were unrelated to rainstorms. But as you can see here, you can see a couple of these floods were maybe not related to hurricanes, and they are tremendously more claims we see. Like Katrina, Wilma, those were massive hurricanes that flooded tons of thousands of people all across the state. You remember, they were big deals. But if you look, there was maybe 20,000 claims versus Helene and Milton, we're seeing more than 60,000 claims. Ian alone, more than 40,000 claims. It's a 1-2 punch of hurricanes are getting wetter as the atmosphere gets hotter. It can hold more moisture. So is it more humid outside in the summer? Yeah, we all know that the air feels wet. That's because it can hold more water. So as climate change turns the temperature up on the dial for this atmosphere, we do feel a lot more water in the air. The rainfall can get a lot more extreme. So we're seeing climate change effects on the rainfall we see, but we're also, packing more and more people on coasts in Florida. And I heard a lot of people who've lived here for decades. I'm sure you're going to tell me that there's so many more people in your community than there were 20, 30 years ago. And that's right. We're packing a lot more people on the coast, which is also pushing up the number of flood claims we see. What does that also mean for you? It means your tax dollars are getting constantly pushed into this. There are a lot of proactive cities that are doing a lot to try to fix this. Because there are things we can do. So all of those flood maps I showed you are if nothing happens, if we do nothing, if we just sit there and go, oh my gosh, look, the water's to my ankles, it's at my knees, it's at my waist, it's inside my house and my couch. But that's not what most communities are doing. Most communities are addressing this in some form. Are we addressing it fast enough? Are we addressing it the right way? Those are open questions, right? But most communities have stormwater master plans. Most communities have stormwater mitigation specialists. They have floodplain mitigation specialists whose job is to try to help keep parts of the city dry. And forever, that has mostly been how do we make the rain not flood our streets. And only in the last 50 years or so, 40 years or so, have local governments started to consider, well, sea level rise and climate change may prove more challenging. They may speed that up, may cause much more flooding issues than we were really expecting or were already planning for. So local governments have now started to explicitly account for sea level rise, king tide, stronger rainstorms, all those other facets of climate change that we are already experiencing. And most infamous down here is probably Miami Beach, which is committed more than $500 million since 2018 into a road raising program. It was very dramatic. They were seeing some roads go up as much as 3 feet. But as you can see from their before and afters, they're really effective. If you look closely at this photo, the one on the left is West Ave, if you've been there, sort of near Lincoln Road. And you can see that the tides were about 1.4 feet NAVD, which is sort of basically a measure of elevation on this day. Now, after they built this project, the tides are even higher. They're almost half a foot higher, but that street, it's dry. So they really is proven to be a success story in many of these places, although there have been a lot of resident issues with where you put these pumps, you're getting rid of my parking spots, some concerns about if you raise these roads but don't elevate the homes, does it flood the homes? But a lot of other communities have followed in their leads. The Florida Keys has got a very ambitious road raising project underway. North Bay Village, Key Biscayne, and obviously Fort Lauderdale has really begun this process of road raising and road elevation in a big way recently last year. Although in Fort Lauderdale, I attended a bunch of their meetings and you heard some really good questions. They brought in some experts. They brought a panel from the Urban Land Institute, had them come in and listen. And I thought they took a lot of resident complaints and questions very seriously, as opposed to maybe Miami Beach talks about itself sort of lightheartedly sometimes as the canary in the coal mine. They were one of the first to do these dramatic sea level rise informed road raising projects, and they made mistakes along the way, and they made expensive mistakes. Some of these projects are so very expensive. I said earlier that $500 million is what Miami Beach initially thought it was going to cost to do the first tranche of road raisings. One of their projects right now, the First Street project, the very tip of South Beach, they thought it was going to cost, I'm going to pull my numbers back up here. Yes, they thought it was going to cost $46 million. That's what they originally budgeted for it. They got a $35 million grant from the state. They thought they were good to go, but construction costs, overruns, everything has driven that cost to $148 million. So that's triple the cost just for like a handful of miles of road. And when we say road, we obviously don't just mean lifting the road. This is a big, complicated puzzle. It involves more pumps. It involves bigger pipes. It involves sometimes widening the road, sometimes narrowing the road. It's a huge endeavor to do these projects. But I think from some of these images, you can see that they feel like they've proven their case in some of these neighborhoods. So that's really something we're seeing a lot more from local governments here, is a much closer level of attention paid to how do we make sure that our future stormwater plans are informed by sea level rise. And it's more than just roads. It's making sure residents' homes are protected. It's making sure the parks maybe are designed to hold more water, like we were hearing for Oakland Park earlier, or even that developers who are developing a new property maybe are encouraged to hold more, retain more water than they would have had to 20 years ago. There are lots of innovative ways that local, state, and federal government are encouraging communities to adapt to climate change. And we can talk some more about that later, but I'm going to move on and let someone else talk. I will also save this for the end, but I will give my last pitch that I love talking to normal people. I want to know what real residents think about what's happening in their neighborhood. So please, you all feel free to welcome to reach out to me. I want to hear the stories you've got, the floods you've seen, the changes you'd like to see in your neighborhood, or bragging about a change you already are seeing. So we can come back at the end, but that is going to be it for me, and I will move it back to Susie.
That was awesome. Thank you, Alex. As usual, we are so fortunate to have Alex to go to with all of her in-depth climate articles to remind us what's going on, to inform us what's going on. We really appreciate all you do. So thank you. And we'll be hearing more from you later. Let's move on to Adrian. Adrian, are you ready to go?
Ready to go. All right. Thank you so much, Susie, for putting this together tonight and inviting me. And thanks everyone else for being here. And that was awesome, Alex. I just followed your Instagram page. Very nice. Okay, let me get my slides up. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So as we know already, all of us, is that flooding is getting worse. But the reality is that most people don't know this, and they don't really understand what their own risk is or what it means, and more importantly, what they can do about it. So I guess, first of all, why is flooding getting worse? And in addition to sea level rise, part of the problem is that the ocean is getting hotter. The Gulf is getting hotter. So this figure here shows, deviations from the average in terms of the temperature at the surface of the Gulf. And we've seen headlines about this in recent years, that the Gulf is hotter than ever. So we see here on the right that it's about 2 degrees hotter than it really should be right now. And that's already quite a bit above the average. So that hot ocean, that hot Gulf, is what fuels these storms. And I think most people understand this, but that's one of the reasons flooding is getting worse, is we're seeing stronger storms, and that leads to more storm surge and more rain. And I wanted to add this figure here to make another point, and it's a pretty cool figure, so we'll look at it for a second and then I'll pause it. But the point here is that, when you heat up something as complex as the atmosphere, which is a very complex, nonlinear system, it's not just that you warm it up and it warms up evenly everywhere. As it gets hotter, you've got all this mixing that's going on in all these directions. And that's why, we see a lot more heat. It's a lot hotter a lot of the time, but then one of these polar vortices will come down, and then we'll get this extreme cold that came out of nowhere, like we saw in Texas, I think 3 or 4 years ago, a big freeze there. So we're going to see more extreme heat, more extreme cold, and then also just more extreme rain. So it's just going to get chaotic out there. The atmosphere is becoming more unstable. And, what does this mean? As, in Fort Lauderdale, it meant 25 inches of rain in April of 23. And so just more extreme weather in general. And on the flood insurance side, as risk goes up, insurance goes up, and the flood zones have expanded, as Alex mentioned. So we put this map together last year for a real estate magazine. The blue is showing what the flood zone looked like before the change, and the red is showing after the change. So there were about 89,000 properties, more or less, that were added to the floodplain last year. So, flooding alone isn't the problem. And we've been trying for a long time to control flooding, to build walls, to keep it out, to pump it out. But as it intensifies, it's going to become more a reality. But the real problem is when your home floods, right? So there's only so much we can do as citizens to encourage the government to invest in large infrastructure and so forth. But there are things you can do to manage flood risk for your own home, and that's really the focus of my presentation. So, but first I'll introduce myself, which I haven't really done. My name is Adrian Santiago Tate. I'm the CEO and co-founder of HighTide Intelligence. We're a flood risk data company, and we're on a mission to accelerate flood adaptation with data-driven technology. And this is most importantly, our mascot, Kiara. Okay, so what are the options when it comes to managing your flood risk? So when it comes to any kind of risk, whether it's getting in your car and driving, or your health, you can assume risk, you can transfer it, you can mitigate it, and you can avoid it. So I'll talk through each one individually, but what does this mean? So assuming the risk basically means that you're covering yourself. So you're rolling the dice, and maybe you're self-insuring, maybe you're preparing for that, but it means at the end of the day, the buck stops at you. Transferring risk means that you're paying someone else to assume that risk for you in the form of an insurance policy. And then mitigating the risk means actually doing something about it to reduce the risk. So you could elevate or flood-proof your property. And finally, avoiding risk means you can sell your home to someone else, or you could theoretically and practically move the building somewhere else, do a structural move, which is an option, but it's kind of the most extreme case. So these are your options. There's not many. And the reality is when it comes to flooding is very expensive. So all the options are pretty expensive when you have high risk. They have different levels. There's kind of, depending on your situation and your risk tolerance and how long you plan to own the property, there's kind of different paths for you. So the first one of rolling the dice or self-insuring, it could cost you nothing. You could own the property for decades and nothing ever happens and it works out great, or it could work out really poorly. And, we've seen a lot of people lose everything just by assuming the risk knowingly or unknowingly. And, this is a decision you're kind of making, it's not every year, you're making this decision constantly. Insuring is a very common option. So here you're transferring the risk. I've seen policies go for as low as $200, and I've seen policies for tens of thousands of dollars. It really depends on, the value of your property and how high the risk is. And this is a 1-year contract that you're making usually. So elevating or flood proofing, this is where you're actually reducing the risk. So you can, not everyone knows this, but you can actually take a building and lift it up and put it on a new foundation. And newer homes in floodplains that are following building codes will be built usually higher up, but you can retrofit a building and lift it up. So that's typically the long-term solution for residential properties. And for commercial properties, it's typically more common to flood-proof, but there are actually flood-proofing options out there for residential properties now. So we're actually very lucky that we have Brian on this call. He's from floodproofing.com. They're an amazing company, and very excited that he'll be talking about floodproofing. And these are longer-term solutions, right? You're actually doing something about it. And then finally, selling your structural move, you're avoiding the risk. So you can cash out, and maybe it'll work out great if you do it now. But you could also move this building. In some situations, that may make sense. And this is a permanent solution to the problem. But in the case of selling, you're not actually solving the problem because now somebody else has your problem. So, okay, so we wanted to help make this easier for everyone, because wrangling all this data and going out there and learning about your flood risk and understanding what it means is complicated. So we built this platform called Arkly to do that. And you can access arkly.com on your phone or on your computer. And I'll show you how it works using my grandfather's home as an example. So he lives over in Palm City, right on the water. He has an incredible view of the river, of the St. Lucie River, and he's been sitting on his couch enjoying his view for a very long time. And he's completely oblivious to this risk. He's one of those old Navy guys who's very stubborn, just enjoys his beer and doesn't want to be told what to do. So that's who he is, and this is where he lives. And his risk in terms of dollars per year, which is how we quantify it, is $12,000 a year. So we wanted to go beyond kind of the 1 to 10 scale, which can be helpful, but doesn't mean much. We wanted to help people understand what flood risk actually means to their wallet, to their finances. So what does $12,000 a year mean? It means that my grandfather theoretically should be setting aside $12,000 in like a piggy bank every year in order to keep up with his long-term losses, right? So it doesn't mean that there's going to be a $12,000 flood every year, but that over the long term, this is how much he's setting aside. So you can also think of it as like a self-insurance estimate or like a hidden cost. And $12,000 is a lot of money to set aside every year. And even if you know that you should theoretically do this, you're probably not doing this. So the more practical thing to do is to look at the insurance options and your mitigation options. So when it comes to insurance in this neighborhood, the average was $1,100 a year. And we wanted to make it easy for people to get flood insurance quotes. So we partnered with an insurance agency called Rocket Flood. And if you click here, you can go through this and get your quotes, no obligation, in just 5 minutes and see what the market looks like, right? And it changes every year. So I can tell you that his quote came back from the National Flood Insurance Program, which is the main insurer that most people use, like 95% or more, came back at $4,200. And the private market came back 2 years ago at $1,600. That's what he ended up getting. And then the next year it went up to $2,500, right? So it went up quite a bit, still better than the NFIP. So for a lot of people, flood insurance is the most practical solution. You can't elevate your home before hurricane season. There are things you can do, which Brian will talk about. But for a lot of people, flood insurance really is a great option. And, the standard policy gets you $250,000 of coverage, which is $250,000 of peace of mind. And then finally, the reduce your risk option. We don't have anything about floodproofing here yet, but we will. But for elevating your home, you can't actually go and get a loan to elevate your home. But if you could, it would theoretically cost $16,000 a year, which is quite a bit more than the self-insurance option. So in this case, insuring your risk is a good one. And then, yeah, that's kind of the overview of Arkly. If you want to use this tool for yourself, all you have to do is type in your address, and we've got all of Florida and Puerto Rico covered. So let me go back. I think, yeah, that's all I got. Here's my email if you want to reach out and you have any questions. I'm happy to walk people through, like how to use the platform for themselves, since we're still building this and we'd love to see how people interact with it. And back to you, Susie. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Adrian. That was great. As usual, I've learned so much from you. Would you do us all a favor and in the chat box, put the Arkly, just a link to the Arkly map so that people can, in case they didn't use your QR code, they can just go right there. Thank you. Perfect.
There it is.
Excellent. And later, I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about the CRS and what that means to the communities. But at this time, I want to move over to Brian. And Brian, would you please take it from here and tell us a little bit about how we could possibly flood-proof our home and retrofit for resilience?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me, and thanks to Adrian for the introduction to Susie and Trisha. We did great meeting earlier this week. So yeah, my name is Brian Shaw. I'm a certified floodplain manager. I have been so for the past 17 years now with floodproofing.com. And just some background about who we are and what we do. We are a team of engineers, code compliance specialists. We do have licensed insurance agents on staff. But really what we do is 3 phases. So we work both residential and commercial buildings in the floodplain. And we want to help with the consultation for the floodproofing. So whether it's new construction or retrofit, we want to give options. So we set ourselves up at floodproofing.com where we manufacture and distribute all of these products that you see at the bottom of the screen. Now, some are more of a fit, for commercial buildings, some for residential, but we really want it to be that one-stop shop because most buildings, they'll take a multi, product approach, for different openings. Some are just better fits. So on the front end, we're helping out with that consultation, that risk assessment with the engineering. We are a manufacturer and distributor. And then also we have an installation team that's in-house. So really, anytime you're looking at floodproofing, we want to be able to provide not only the quote for the product, but also the installation, the one-stop shop, so you know what you're getting kind of all in. So we've been in business for about 25 years, and I'll quickly just go through, what we do a little bit more in detail. So we do both wet floodproofing and dry floodproofing. And wet floodproofing is that elevation technique where you're built up on a crawl space or garage, and then you're using flood vents for that bottom enclosure to relieve that pressure. Dry floodproofing is when your walls are structural, watertight, and then you want to keep water out of those openings, those doors, those windows with flood barriers. So we do both. And then, there's codes in place for new construction in flood zones, and then there's, retrofits. But these all exist is because, you have different forces at play. That hydrostatic load from floodwater really exerts a lot of pressure on a building's wall if it's not properly constructed. And we see these types of images and applications after every major storm event, and you have damage if it's not properly protected. So with wet floodproofing, the general term could mean a couple different things, elevating that first finished floor above the flood level, raising mechanicals, using flood resistant materials in that enclosure below. But typically when someone says wet floodproofing, they're referring to flood vents, also referred to as flood openings or hydrostatic relief vents. So we manufacture a product called Smart Vent, and we have engineered products, meaning that there is, testing and certification behind them, made specifically, for flooding. This vent, hydrostatic relief vent, this is going in a garage, a crawl space, unfinished space, not habitable space. And it's not your typical doggy door. These are manufactured right in South Carolina, marine grade 316 stainless steel. And if you look at that video on the bottom right, there's two floats inside of the flood door. So a rodent can't push it open, but when the flood water enters that flood door, buoyancy lifts up those two internal floats, unhinges that door to relieve that hydrostatic pressure. And then unlike an air vent, it doesn't have a mesh screen on it when it opens. So there's a lot of debris in flood water. So it's not going to clog up and not let the water get through, not relieve the pressure. So we have a bunch of different types of models for different applications here. And then just, a real kind of case study here. This was a home that was elevated and they didn't have flood vents in the bottom enclosure. So the habitable space was above the flood level and they were paying a high flood insurance premium. They came to us and we said it's because that space isn't exempt from the rating below because you don't have, proper flood vents. So they got retrofitted in. And shortly after they were installed, the home was flooded out for over 6 weeks. This was a home right on the Illinois River. And you can see here just from this footage, those flood vents in action, equalizing that pressure on the wall, doing their job. And also just the picture on the right, the amount of debris that's typically in floodwater and why you need a engineered flood vent if going with this wet floodproofing technique, because it needs to be able to get through the vent. So since retrofitting, this home has been flooded over 5 times with no claims or structural damage. So that's the concept of wet floodproofing. Just for some perspective, it's mainly a new construction, right? It's code driven. If a home is in a flood zone, any residential home, first floor above the flood level, we do about 12,000 homes a year. But it is a retrofit case for some people that are elevated up on a crawl space or they want to protect their garage and relieve that pressure. The other side of what we do is dry floodproofing. This has a lot of different options. And again, we're mainly focused on the building level protection and the openings. So this product right here is our most popular residential dry floodproofing product. It's our expandable flood barrier. So this is limited to 28 inches in height. So it's great for shallow flooding, right? Those expected flood heights of 28 inches and under. Why this product is so great is it's standardized, right? It gets shipped quick, it's off the shelf, and the sides extend out from 30 to 43 inches. So for a single doorway, you could deploy it in under 5 minutes. And once you crank out the sides, it pressurizes to the door jamb. And then it has an inflatable seal on the sides and bottom. So, there's no pre-installation, right? No anchoring into the building. So this is completely acceptable by code for residential. And you can daisy chain them together. If you look at that bottom picture to protect a garage, for example, that would require, right, a midspan post and just one anchor in the grade. But you could do different configurations with this product. And, again, it's a really popular product for residential, someone that wants to quickly protect, an opening from floodwater getting in. These next couple products I'll go through really quick, but this is a product we manufacture here. These are engineered, aluminum flood logs. So if you need to go higher than 28 inches, these can go to any height, right, to any width. And, this is a product that, has gaskets on it, and you drop in the logs one on top of the other, and then you can press them down. So all of this is removable. It does require some pre-installation of anchoring into the building to get those side mounts up, but offers great storage. I will just say again, we are, code experts as it pertains to floodproofing a structure and a building. And, we're working a lot in Florida where residential, by code, you're technically not allowed to anchor into a building to dry floodproof. That we see as changing. We're involved in a lot of the community meetings where, we have to take a practical standpoint. And if someone does want to mitigate their risk by putting some flood barriers up, we have to consider that different than the dry floodproofing standard for a commercial building, for example. So an option here, right, with flood logs, and we're protecting doors, windows, vehicular entrances. The walls of the building, they should be structural and watertight. But if you do want to protect openings, flood barriers are a great solution. This is there is something called passive dry floodproofing that doesn't require human intervention, like that wet floodproofing technique. That's passive, right? Doesn't require human intervention. Those flood vents are going to open up during the flood. The flood barriers, they're typically active, but this is a passive option. These are automatic gates that lift up out of the ground with the flood water. So if you look at the diagram in the bottom left, normal rainwater gets through a collection grate, down a drain pipe, taps into the stormwater lines or outlets to a different source. But when that drain pipe is overcome, this wall will lift up automatically with the floodwater to seal off an opening. We also do floodproof windows. So the window itself could be have a structural inner layer. Now this is a fixed window, but it could be half-inch layer glass over half-inch layer glass. We've done all types of projects with this, even residential. But just know it is an option to have a window that is strong as steel, as strong as flood barrier, could take the impact requirements for a flood barrier and not let water get through. We also do flood gates and flood doors to any size. These are point of use stored products, hinged products. And then just to finish up, we do perimeter flood barriers as well. So really with this option, a lot of times when we're looking at residential, if someone is expecting a 6-foot flood height and, we look at their stud construction, the walls, it's not going to handle 6 feet. So there's really not a point to protect just the openings. Then we may suggest a perimeter approach, surround the entire building. So we offer a bunch of different options here, from water-filled tube products to, steel trusses that stick up with liners on them. But if you just look at that example in the bottom left, this is a couple homes that completely surrounded their property with a perimeter style flood barrier, and you could see all that flood water and just how dry they are. So all of these different options, right? Different budgets, different storage requirements, different deployment requirements. That's what we want to help talk people through before they spend any money. We want to give them ballpark estimates, budgetary, let them know options at least, because it really, when it comes to dry flood proofing, a different solution per building. And I think that is it that I had. So
Brian,
yeah,
before
thank you so much.
go off,
Yeah.
Brian, go back one again, please.
Yes.
Would you explain what the orange, how you deploy those? Because those are interesting, and those sometimes are a little more affordable also.
Yeah. So that orange product, you may have seen in Florida. I think the governor even mentioned it. It's a product called Tiger Dam, where you are a distributor of that product, not one that we manufacture, but it's a great product. It, typically comes in 50-foot section lengths, and you would typically connect to a hydrant, or pump from a water source because you want a high flow rate. But essentially, you're filling up, say a 50-foot section at a time. You could bend it at any angle, right? Or you could connect pieces together with a sleeve. You do have to strap it down, right, with some anchors. To achieve higher heights, if you look at that bottom right picture, you could stack them in like a 2-1 configuration, or, even higher, 3-2-1. But it really is a great product for longer runs, right? You do need a water source, but like you said, Susie, it is an affordable option at times. And these perimeter style solutions, right, not just for surrounding a building, they're used for water diversion, right, along, coastlines, river lines, even to protect the entire sections of a community, like they're doing down in Florida. But multiple different products, like you see here, could have the same effect. It's just, again, what terrain are you on? Do you have access to water? What are your storage capabilities, and what's your budget? Really depends on all these different options.
And if can those be reused? When you drain the water out, do they make it through? I mean, have you seen them used over and over again, or
Yeah,
not?
great question. So with all the products that I've shown here today, first I just want to say they're all engineered, tested, and certified. Sandbags, for example, sure, if you do it maybe the right way with engineering behind it, could it work? Maybe, right? But that's not something we offer. Our products have testing and certification. That's what we want to sell. So that's all, they're all tested and certified. Reusability, all of our products are reusable. So yes, there's really the only case that, for example, some of these products that require a liner, um, you may want to replace the liner if you go through a flood event. And not that the liner is not reusable, but if you have, debris hitting the liner, you may not want to spend the time inspecting it for any potential tears right after it. So it might be more cost effective to replace the liner. But Tiger Dam, all of these products that you see, completely reusable, very long shelf life, for different components of the systems.
And one last question, then I'll open up to everyone else. Affordability, are there times when there are grants or ways to help pay for some of these that you found some communities use?
Yeah, for sure. We don't specifically get involved with the grants, but I can tell you that our most popular residential option, this product is called the Dam Easy Flood Barrier. This has been used for, at least 3 grants in the past year and a half, where, we have different communities tapping into, different grants and buying, 50 of these, 100 of these at a time, and actually distributing them to residents. So
Excellent.
yes, it can be used for that.
Okay, thank you. And thank you,
Thank you.
Brett. The information is just, I learned so much. It was amazing. So thank you so much. At this time, it doesn't look like, Trish, do we have any questions in the chat box?
I don't see any questions, although Marilyn did point out that the Florida APA is hosting a lunch and learn on June 12th, called the Art and Science of FEMA Flood Maps in Dania Beach, if anybody is interested in that.
You have a question? Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Ted? You're.
There we go. I hear a lot about all these reasonings, oh, the water's getting hotter, the storms are getting bigger. I know in our neighborhood, about the fact is that there's just nowhere for the water to go with all the overdevelopment. I mean, we had a lot of ponds, we had creeks, we had preserves, which are now all gone. I've lived in the same 900 block of Southwest 19th Street for 60 years, and we never had the problem because we had something in place by Mother Nature, which is now completely gone. I just hear, all about these reasons, but there's just, in our neighborhood, there's nowhere for the water to go. I mean, we have 0 lot lines, we have changing zoning, we have all this stuff, and if you raise the roads, it's going to go right into the houses. I mean, the houses are gonna be like New Orleans and in the bottom of a soup bowl.
Ted, we're hearing that as we go out and speak at a lot of the HOAs and civic associations. We're hearing this often. But one of the things that we've heard coming back is do you have any parks in these areas?
Blocks and blocks away.
Yes, and parks are now, as I'm sure I'll let some of the experts share in this, but as Alex mentioned earlier, parks are now being used in a lot of coastal areas for storm resiliency. Alex, do you want to answer this?
Absolutely. Yeah, Ted, good point. Great point, because it is a huge part of the issue here. There's lots of things that contribute to flooding, right? We talk about the storms, we talk about climate change, because those are somehow easier to measure than looking at a community's completely comprehensive stormwater master plan and saying, okay, well, we used to have this much water here and it would naturally drain into this park and this empty lot and this person's front yard. But now we've let this person go lot line to lot line. We got rid of this part. We changed the tilt of the street. And even a really big thing that comes up a lot often when I attend these meetings is cleaning out storm drains. It's a huge part of it. You got to clean out your storm drains. It does not solve climate change, nor does creating more green space, but they are some of the cheaper options that communities can do that will make an immediate difference. Is regular maintenance of your storm drains. I know there was a big issue. We had a rain bomb in like 2021 in Miami, and all these brand new check valves we used to have. So it's like the water would be able to flow from your street out into the river, but it was a one-way valve, so the water couldn't come back up, which were very expensive. We were glad to have them. They're a really good option that cities are looking into, but they didn't work and we flooded because they were clogged with trash. So some of these, there's definitely a conversation needs to be had about if you're allowing someone to build every single inch of their lot in asphalt, you got to say, all right, fine. If you don't want to have any green space, you got to have a cistern, you got to have a French drain. Like there are answers, and that is a big part of it for sure.
Adrian or Brian, do you have any answers to any? Would you like to add to this?
I can comment on this. So, I mean, like back to Ted's original concern, like Alex said, there's a lot of different reasons for this. So developing in areas that are known to flood is obviously not a great move. And then the fact that the ocean is rising, storms are getting more intense. So it's a combination of all those things, and the environment is very built up, right? We have a lot of concrete everywhere, so that doesn't really give the water anywhere to go. And really, there's only so much that stormwater and drainage improvements and parks and all these things will accomplish. And that's just the reality of it. So we have to, it's great to pursue these solutions, but also to have good, reasonable expectations about what we can expect. So this is why I think it's very important to attack on both sides, right? Like the government and the engineering companies need to go out there and engineer these cities, and we need to lift them just like they did with Galveston Island 100 years ago. Like you can accomplish great things, right? But at the same time, from the property level side, there are things you can do to protect your home, because flooding is just going to become more of a reality. So that's kind of my 2 cents.
Thank you. How about you, Brian? Any answer here?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I was answering someone's direct message.
That's okay. No, the question is with all the building and the cement replacing a lot of our natural remediation areas that we used to have, being that we had mangroves and we had more parks, and now a lot of the green space is being replaced with a lot of cement. How do we move forward with mitigating storm resiliency?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. I mean, a lot of towns also are putting bans on bringing in fill, for new developers, for example, in the floodplain. That's one of the advantages of wet flood proofing, right? You're maintaining that flood storage capacity, right, in the flood zone. You're not blocking that water out. I'll say, and this kind of goes to one of the questions I just saw pop in. It's going to really depend on that warning time and alerts, right? And just one of the new code updates in ASCE 2424, which just got released, is that for new construction, these buildings, this is more on the commercial side, but early warning systems, right, are going to have to be in place for these buildings to alert them when a storm's coming. and it's important, right? Community-wide alerts are great, right? But there's companies coming out and developing, software to really alert people in advance based on modeling, rain configurations at the property level, right? So really that's what people need, property level warning time when something's coming. I know that didn't directly answer the question, but just my
All right,
take
no,
from it.
much appreciated.
was
Trish, I
that-
think we have some questions, don't we?
Yeah, that I was going to ask Dr. Gassman if that answered her question. Because she had the question, to be able to deploy a perimeter barrier, you need warning time. How effective are these types of barriers when the community experiences a rain bomb? So I'm wondering if Brian's answer answered her question.
And
Yeah, I think that when a rain bomb is a very different situation than a hurricane. People in South Florida have gotten accustomed to having warning time. People in the Midwest experience tornadoes and they get a siren, they've got 5 minutes. In South Florida, we usually get 3 days. And so to be able to get the resources to put out a perimeter barrier, you need adequate warning time. And so the event of April 2023, we did not have that level of warning time to be able to put out a perimeter barrier. And so that's my question is, are there a lot of people who go through floods are usually experiencing that flooding because of riverine swelling. South Florida is a little different in that we have tidal impacts, and then we have these flash floods from these extreme rain events, or we have storm surge. Some of those provide warnings, some don't. And so I guess part of my question is, you have to, when you're thinking about solutions to a specific type of flood, you have to think about how much warning time you have in order to be able to use those different techniques.
I know when we were looking into this, because of what Dr. Gassman is talking about is compound flooding, where it's where you're getting flooding from more than just one area. You're getting a heavy rainfall along with either rising seas, high tides, storm surge, and some of us call it a triple whammy. So we have different names for it, but with this in mind, I know some of yours can be quickly implemented and some do take time. Is that correct, Brian?
yeah, no, and it's a great point. And really the hierarchy of preferred methods is passive floodproofing is number one, right? And the new standards that are coming out reflect that. ASCE 24-24, for critical facilities, for example, flood design class 4s, they are required to go with passive if they're flood
You just froze, Brian.
allowed for. Oh, sorry. Got me now?
Yeah, you're okay. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So critical facilities, for example, in the new standards do have to use a passive approach, automatic gates that lift up, right? Or wet flood proofing. So passive, you could do that again through elevating and wet flood proofing or automatic gates or floodproof windows. That is preferred, right? Because then you don't need the warning time. It's always there working 24/7. And then the next level of approach is those active barriers at the openings, right? Because they're going to take less time to deploy than surrounding an entire building. So make your walls structural and watertight, and then just protect each individual opening. And then it kind of goes to
some of those in New York City, where they've actually, when they know something's coming fast, they lift up the barrier.
Yeah, for sure. There are kind of hinged products, right, that you manually do, but there's also ones that automatically go up. To your point, in New York, they did a combination with hydraulics built into it, where they could just lift them up with a touch of a button. So really in the hierarchy, perimeter is kind of at the bottom, just due to the volume of product and how long it takes to deploy, for sure. But in some cases, right, if you can't afford to make the walls of your home structural, right, that's really one of your only options is to surround the property.
One of the things that we've been hearing, and that we're hoping that we've been hearing some recommendations and requests that possibly in the future, that when there's building, where we can't go back and do would-haves and should-haves, which we wish we could, but with all the thing going on, that there's more requirements for those builders to do more mitigation efforts for the areas that they're going to be negatively affecting in the neighborhoods, that they include some stormwater mitigation efforts in their building, so that it, if there's funds put on the side to help with possible parks being made into temporary water storages, different ideas that at least some of the building that they're actually having to give back a little bit for what they're doing, because they are affecting neighborhoods and certain communities by all the cement, and maybe that the cities start requiring them to be more have more flood ideas and incentives, even if it comes to more pervious sidewalks. I mean, just in certain areas, just to start the thinking process and possibly recommending some of this and requiring it for some of the builders. So that has come up a lot. Any other questions?
Susie, Julia had asked about any nature-based solutions with mangroves and other vegetation to mitigate flooding, and both Adrian and Alex answered her. I would think that people, if they can, go into the chat, because they answered her very, very well, and Alex gave a very good example as well. I don't know, do you want me to read it, or can people go?
Alex, would you like to just go ahead and share that?
Sure. So Adrian offered some good points of the
yes, Adrian
research he's done on it too.
Whoever,
they both did.
Yeah, so I just mentioned that, you know, trees can definitely absorb rainwater. If you have a completely gray street with no trees, you're gonna end up with more water pooling than you would in like those suburban neighborhoods with the big old growth trees that have been here 50 years. They're gonna do a better job at absorbing that rainwater, but it's just not at the scale we need in a lot of places. It's helpful. It's a yes and situation. But Julia, who I've spoken to before, hi Julia, also, you know, I think you're also kind of asking, are there beautiful things we can do? And there are cool parks out there that are designed. The Dutch are really good at this. We've seen some in New York and New Jersey. I linked to a story my colleague wrote in Miami Beach. There are beautiful parks that everyone wants to hang out in that just have hidden flood potential, big tanks underground that can hold more water. So you can really kind of get the hybrid of the gorgeousness and nature-based solutions with also the heft that the gray solutions can give you.
Yeah, what Alex is talking about is, and some of you that know me, you've heard me I've been talking about this for about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, are, you know, basketball courts that can hold 500,000 gallons of stormwater temporarily. The parks that Alex is talking about, they can hold over 2 million gallons of stormwater temporarily. A lot of times the water that's used at these parks is like the gift that keeps on giving, because then they use that to water the landscaping in the communities. So there are some amazing nature-based solutions that have to be explored, and I have discussed this with Dr. Gassman at times, and I know that some of this is expensive. And I know grants have to be maybe possibly looked into. I have to applaud Oakland Park, one of our neighbors, because they are one of the first in our area that they did put a cistern in their park. And from what we heard last year from Albert, their head of chief resiliency officer in Oakland Park, it has been a great success. I do have a quick question before we go. If there's not anyone else, I just want to ask Alex really quickly, since you cover so many in-depth climate issues, is there one thing that really stands out to you that is the most alarming that we should be concerned about?
I think it's flooding. I think you guys are focused on the right thing. I think that this is a problem that we can adapt around. It's not a foregone conclusion that South Florida is going to be completely underwater in 50 years. There's a lot that can be done, and not just like writing policies so that we're stopping the flow of greenhouse gases. There's a lot of good engineering projects that have to happen. And I think people forget how important their voices are, and how they can just go to a public meeting, meet their officials, meet their bureaucrats, and say, hey, I'd like to see this in my neighborhood, and I would vote for someone who would do something like this. I think local residents often think that the government is a process that happens so far beyond them, but it is a process that you are so intimately involved in, and you have so much agency. I think people need to really realize this. So groups like this, I think, are great. You guys can get together, build a community. You're advocating around solutions, which are at hand. And we have two excellent gentlemen here talking about their products that are solutions, and they're right there. We could really take advantage of them better.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Christine, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I don't feel like doing that typing in the chat. I just have a question. With all of these buildings that the city of Fort Lauderdale have now, all these high rises, how are they going to protect the buildings since these buildings are already built? And I'm looking at what took place in April last year, April 2 years ago. How would that ever be? How can they even fix something like that? You never know when it's going to flood. It's going to flood when it's going to flood. You don't have time to do anything with it. What's going to happen with that type of situation? Who's responsible for that? Who would take care of putting that in place? And one other question, and to add to that, how high would those things be able to catch that water when it's flooding out?
Meaning, can you repeat the last part of that question again, please?
How high would those barriers, how high are they? How high do they go up? In other words,
Yes.
if the flood water come in like they did over on State Road 84, that was a lot of water over there. How high are those barriers, especially those long orange things, those, because I think that'd be the only thing they can put down quickly. How high? Well, what's the purpose of putting them up, and if the water gonna overrun that height?
Exactly. Anybody want to take these questions?
Yeah, I'll just speak to, at least in my presentation, right? We showed a bunch of different options.
Mhm.
Some of them have limitations for height. For example, that Tiger Dam, right? The water-filled tube barrier. There are different diameters, right? And then, you can stack them. So from an engineering standpoint, it's technically unlimited how high you could go. But one of the concerns is the footprint, right? Because you're doing this pyramid approach with it. So sometimes it's not really applicable, but really depending on the product, height is really not a limitation with the right product, with the right engineering behind it. I think the other part of your question was deployment. That does currently fall on the building owner, right? And that could be a concern. Not only just having the resources at any time of day, right, to deploy them, but also, with turnover, with maybe, property management, having people trained on how to deploy them, right? Some of these systems, you need to know how to deploy, not just have the people ready. So it is a concern. I keep going back to these new standards that just got released, ASCE 24, but one of them, for example, and this relates to commercial, is there's now an annual deployment requirement, right? So there hasn't been anything for flood as far as like inspections, as far as like fire inspections that need to happen, or facade inspections on buildings. Now there is going to be a standard for flood where once a year, special inspection agency, kind of third party, is going to have to, review somebody deploying their flood barriers and taking them down to keep people trained. So it is a good thing.
Wow.
And then,
All right,
Adrian, we
thank
go
you.
back to you. When you look at, sometimes the only option might be you may have to start thinking about raising your home. Am I correct?
Yeah, in some cases, for some buildings, that's what makes the most sense, right? So some buildings lend themselves to floodproofing, especially commercial buildings that are built to a certain standard. And then for residential buildings that can't withstand that hydrostatic load on the sides, like historic buildings, for example, elevation is a great option. And cities like Mandeville, Louisiana, if you're ever visiting New Orleans, go across the causeway and visit Mandeville to see what that looks like, because they've taken the vast majority of the buildings that were in the floodplain and elevated them, many of them beautiful historic homes. So it's pretty cool to see it yourself.
And there was an Elevate Florida grant that was for about 7 months that they paid 80% of the home that was of homes that they were, if you were able to meet their requirements, they would pay 80%, and then you would be responsible for 20. And they were even finding funding for some of the 20. So, and especially if roads are going to start being raised, from what I'm hearing from most of the specialists, eventually that the homes are going to have to come up with them, or else they're going to get dumped on from all the water coming off the roads. So this might not be something we're doing at this time right now, but it's something you have to start getting comfortable with, start talking about, start learning more about, because it's not going anywhere. It's here, and it's only going to get worse. I have one more question. I know we're running over, but I have to ask you, Adrian, can you explain to everyone what the CRS is really quickly? Because again, when we do become more resilient, it will make a difference possibly on your pocketbook. So go ahead.
Definitely. And Brian actually is a certified floodplain manager, so he's more qualified than I am to talk about the CRS, but we do quite a lot of work with the CRS. We just finished a project yesterday. The CRS is a community rating system. I have a mentor who is a retired FEMA guy, and he's told me it's the best thing FEMA has ever done. So it's a very kind of proactive program. It's all about kind of managing development in the floodplain and raising awareness of risk and mitigating risk. And the carrot that FEMA puts out for communities is that if you participate in the CRS and you do the activities and you go up the classes, every class you go up, policyholders in your community get a 5% discount on their flood insurance. So, you know, the CRS is a great thing for communities to do. And in my opinion, even if there wasn't a flood insurance discount, they should be doing all those things, right? These are all it's a great program. So unfortunately, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty around whether the CRS will continue to exist. So, and I know Alex just wrote a very interesting article that you just launched a few days ago that talked about how some of the legislation could impact, you know, how communities in Florida benefit from the CRS. So,
and just to give you all an example, what he's talking about, it's a rating system from 0 to 10. The lower the number, the more you get off your insurance. So for instance, Pinellas County is a 2, they get about 40% off. We at this stage, I think they're working on it. We're trying to be a 4, but at this time right now, we're a 7. We get, what is it, Dr. Asmat, 15% off?
15.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So, and we do have someone that they did hire that we're going to try to get on one of our Waterlogged series to talk how our city is trying to become more resilient so we can bring down that number and hopefully bring down our insurance rates. Any other questions before I?
Susie, I would
yes?
just want to mention that lunch and learn that the Broward section planners are putting on June 12 in Dania Beach. We're having Mark Haggerty, who is our
yeah, and he's going to be
assistant FEMA.
And yeah, we're and Mark might be on one of ours too.
Right, and we have Marsha Steelman also from Miami, who'll be talking about how they have lowered their rating, and the rating system is such an important thing. But again, I think Adrian mentioned it. There's a bill in Tallahassee, SB 180. Alex, you're aware?
Yeah, Alex.
That we're doing a great call for action to people to ask the governor to veto it, because it was a well-meaning bill in its initial stages, but at the 11th hour, they put in some prohibitions on doing any kind of regulation, which would be restrictive in terms of flooding, or not just flooding, but any kind of regulation. It's a crazy, crazy thing. I won't even get into it. Yeah, but if that gets signed, we may not be able to do any kind of regulations which would improve our community rating system. So there's a lot going on in that respect. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a very important bill, and what it would do is claw back basically cities being able to make recommendations or requirements in their codes to start building a more resilient city. It takes the powers away, and that, you're right, it's very alarming. So we might be calling a call to action. You might be getting some emails. Any other questions?
Yes, Linda, the thing I would like to say is, in our neighborhood, we're having a problem, and we're concerned that at some point we're going to get flooded out because of the new construction, the project that they're trying to do over on Rock Pit Lake. And that lake is a runoff for all the other lakes and everything in the city of Fort Lauderdale. So once they finish filling in that rock pit, when the rains come, we're going to,
Alex, are you hearing this?
Yeah.
We need this. That needs to be exposed. We're really upset about this.
Yes. It really needs to be. And you know, and not only that, the contaminants and the toxins and everything that's in the lake, you know.
No,
and so
we're behind you 100%, and we're going to talk more
that's what we want to hear.
Yes. Alex, Alex, you hear? You heard this, right?
I've heard about the rock pit. I saw the petition going around. I've talked to some other folks in it, but Linda, please, I put my email in the chat. If you don't mind, I'd love to talk to you.
Okay,
Awesome.
I have a video that you can view as well.
And we'll be talking. I'll be seeing you anyway when I speak in your group there. So
That's okay. Thank you.
well, thanks
Okay.
everyone. In closing, because I know I've gone over, but gosh, I just like to give everybody a chance to speak. I want to say thank you all for joining us this evening, and a special thank you to our speakers, Alex and Brian and Adrian. You guys are wonderful. Thank you for all you do and helping educate all of us. We
Yes.
hope you're all leaving here with useful, actionable information that will help you and your families better prepare for storm season and a long-term resilience. I also want to thank you for joining us, and remember to join, to visit our website and join our team. We have no dues or fees. Our membership is free. So you can scan us here or just go to residenceforresilience.org.
Night.
Night, night.
Night.
Take care.